this imbalance and to make provision for the Akwanga Jos Bauchi Road, and equally to facilitate the completion of the Jos Yakubu Gowon Airport, Hepang. Finally, Mr. President, the issue of the cost of governance can be addressed partly through drastic review of project costs in our procurement processes. Presently, the costs are outrageously scandalous, and this has to stop. I therefore urge this Senate to ensure that we take a look at our procurement cost, our project cost, on comparative basis vis-a-vis other countries. On this note, Mr. President, it is my concern that the security situation, the infrastructure deficit, and the procurement cost be addressed as we would be deliberating on the details of the budget. Thank you, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues.
The oil revenue forms a major component of the budget. There is no doubt about that. My concern has to do with the basis of arriving at the oil revenue component of the budget. The 2.18 million barrels per day assumed, I think it is over-ambitious because it has to depend on total security in the Niger Delta region. And from past experience, that 2.18 assumed as an average production per day is over-ambitious. Again, the $57 per day price is also over-ambitious. When we consider that today, the cost of crude, Brent crude, is $59 per barrel. So we are over-ambitious in our estimation. And I fear that we may not meet our revenue target. Having said that, Mr. President, I have looked at the structure of the budget, and I see that there is no balance. Why do I say that? The revenue estimate for 2020 is 8.155 trillion naira. The expenditure estimate is 10.7 trillion naira, which means that we are earning less than what we are projecting to spend. We are spending more than what we are earning. That is an imbalance. The second imbalance is the capital versus the recurrent expenditure. The capital is only 2.46 trillion, while the recurrent is 8.24 trillion. Virtually the entire earnings that we are making is going into recurrent expenditure. Again, the capital versus the total expenditure. Capital of 2.46 versus total expenditure of 10 trillion is only 23%. So this imbalance ought to be addressed.
Mr. President, many have said about VAT. They've said about procurement process. As a quantity surveyor, I'll state clearly here that the increase of the VAT is not in favor of this budget. The reason is this. During the independence speech of the president, he made mention of how he is going to transform power sector by new ideas and initiatives from 3-phase to 7 phases. He also talked about how tax relief or free tax incentive scheme introduced has brought about a gain of 205 billion. If we want to take up this point, because of incentive, we got 205 billion. And at the same time, within few months, we are now killing the incentive by increasing the VAT. I think it's not a good position for us now. If we look at the present VAT we have, the ones that are not mentioned here openly are more than 3. If you increase the VAT to 7.5% today, a contractor or an investor who is coming is still paying educational tax of 1%. He will pay ITF of 1%. He will pay NISTF of 1%. And sometimes goes behind to pay some percentage to ruling party. These taxes are not mentioned. What is the result of the product the man will stand with? So for that reason, I am not in support of this VAT increase, because the VAT already not mentioned is already over 9%. And if you now add them to this, we are now having 10.5% as VAT in the country. It's a burden today for us to achieve this sustaining growth and job creation. Another area my colleague has mentioned, which I tend to agree with them, is about procurement. I'm afraid, Mr. President, we are just having a budget laid down here, and we are having a projection of 2.18 trillion, which is far above the capital budget of 2.114 trillion. Why are we already projecting deficit of 2.18 trillion when we have not even started? The reason is, I think our procurement system is very poor, and we need to correct it. If I'm to project and suggest, we should have year 1 to be for procurement preparations. Year 2 should be the implementation of these projects. If we are projecting a deficit of 2.18 above the capital project, colleagues, this is dangerous. And we cannot continue. And if physical responsibility organization or body will be projecting 3% deficit, while the president himself is projecting 1.5%, we have to look into it as a Senate of 9th Assembly. Mr. President, I therefore submit. Thank you.
I'm so happy that the budget intends to address the diversification of our economy, that millions of jobs were teeming unemployed youth in the country by way of investing heavily on agriculture. Mr. President, even though the sum of 83 billion has been allocated to the sector, though the amount of money that is sunk into a sector that would make the impact, but there must be some kind of mechanism, feedback mechanism, to show how close are we to achieving a particular target or otherwise. For example, we need to know how many metric tons of rice do we intend to produce in 2019, 2020, 2021, and so forth, and what have been obtained, what are the shortfall, what are the surplus. Unless we have this kind of mechanisms, I think it will take time to achieve our desired objective of food security in this country. Because merely closing our borders against any importation of food doesn't solve the problem. What is needed is true investment into the sector, and to invest also in the sector, there must be sustained incentives as practiced in other parts of the world. There is no country that has ever succeeded in its agricultural reforms or sector without a subsidy regime. Even in our fellow African countries here in Tunisia, they have 25% subsidy on agriculture every year to any farmer or to their farmers. In Pakistan, it's 40%, and also 10% for droughts and other natural disasters. And unless we have such kind of approach to the sector in this country, our dream may take time to be achieved. So I feel that in this year's budget, the federal government should introduce more incentive to farming to make it attractive and so profitable, Mr. President. Equally, Mr. President, I want to call for a better funding of our judiciary, because just earlier in the year, the CJN was here for his confirmation, and he gave a very good picture of judiciary, their financial position, to the extent that 76% of our inmates in this country are waiting trial, which is very sad and unbecoming for any nation to be called a serious nation. Equally, Mr. President, I want to use this opportunity to commend Mr. President for raising our foreign reserve from 20 to 40 billion in just a matter of 4 years. I think that is a very commendable effort.
Let me say this budget of 10.3 trillion. Yes, I've listened to some of my colleagues. We have some areas where we are not totally comfortable with. But the idea say this budget, all the underlying assumptions of this budget, they are measured, they are realizable, because budget is a statement of intent. And when you budget yourself too tight, because I noticed that this budget is like the government, they've now budgeted themselves too tight. They want to not underperform this time, they want to surpass all the estimates that they've put into this budget. But Mr. President, we need to do some things. And I would say that maybe I can say 3 things to make sure that this budget works. And that is to increase our revenue. And the platform to use, or the better way of achieving this revenue, is through diversification. Because each time we have issues like this, if you look critically, you will see that everything revolves around what we are able to generate. And I'm happy in a way with this budget. Just like what I said, if you look at all the underlying assumptions, they are not something that it will be too difficult for the government to achieve. Even if you look at the benchmark, if you look at the volume of production on a daily basis, these are things that I think is achievable, particularly looking at where we are now. If you are doing about 1.96, because we have 1.86 plus a buffer stock of 100,000 barrels per day. If you add those, it's almost 2 million. And saying 2.18, I think is achievable. Mr. President, for us to do anything, for an economy to develop, infrastructures must be there. And that is why we just must be hungry for development through development of our infrastructure. If you look at this budget, about $500 billion, a little over $500 billion, is specifically dedicated for infrastructure. Because without infrastructure, whatever we save from morning to night, nothing will happen. I've listened to some of my colleagues too, expectedly so, that they felt that the amount of money budgeted for all this service-oriented ministry, they are too maybe small or low. Yes, I agree with them, but clearly, how can you have an effective healthcare delivery system if the powers are not there, if you don't have access to water, if you cannot even move to those hospitals? So clearly, we need to be hungry for development. And if you look at this budget, you will realize that those areas, power, transportation, works, if you look at them, you will realize that we are laying that solid foundation for development. Because clearly, we cannot even trade amongst ourselves, among states. The time it will take you to move from maybe Abeokuta to Ekiti, you'll have been in London, is because our infrastructures are not just there. We cannot trade within ourselves, not to talk of West African sub-region, not to talk within Africa. There is no train that you can take to say, okay, I want to go to Ghana. It's not possible. Even within Nigeria, to even go to our various constituencies. For you to go to your constituency, Mr. President, sir, you know what you will go through. So clearly, infrastructure is key. And when you look at all of this, by the time we diversify our economy, we will have been in a position to get our people to work. If you look, our expenditure is growing. No problems with that. But we need to grow maybe fourfold our revenue. Once we do that, all this talk of we have huge debt service will be reduced when we increase our revenue. We may not even need to borrow up to that when we're able to reduce our revenue. On this very, what I call short comments, I want to say that this budget is workable. All we need to do is all of us to play our part, and I'm happy with what we are presently doing. Thank you, Mr. President.
With all macroeconomic objectives aligning to stable foreign exchange rate, the economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the Sustainable Development Goals, employment generation, job creation, and declining inflation rate, Mr. President. All these put together help to boost confidence in the market. And Nigeria, being a marketplace, will have to grow along with other economies. Growing revenues from non-oil sector, my President, as well as ensuring collection efficiency will go a long way in improving the budget implementation strategy. Towards rebalancing the distribution of government spending, Mr. President, this government has since 2015 moved recurrent to capital spending from 16% in 2015 to 30% in 2016, 2017, up to 2019, as recently given to us by Mr. President. The desire, therefore, is to improve quality of spending so that we can make savings from our overheads and plow the same savings into capital. Because it is possible, we have all complained about the rigorous and daunting task of our bidding process. Mr. President, times were in 2016-17 when an efficiency unit of the federal government was created and well applauded. But suddenly, the efficiency unit has gone under since the appointment of Mrs. Omeha to head the debt management desk. It is my hope that what was beginning to also get to the state through this efficiency unit will be revamped at the federal level, and they see the trickle effects of such in our various MDAs. So we hope that this efficiency unit will come back to life, Mr. President, as it will help us greatly. The growth we have been aspiring to have within the country, Mr. President, is also not happening the way we had expected. Following the recent revelation that we are still at 2.93% annual growth, it is a far cry from what Ghana today achieves. Ghana is on 6.8, and it is hoping to peak to 8%. We hope that when we re-energize the economy through SMEs and others, we'll be able to also have a faster growth rate as expounded by my leader in the lead debate of this budget.
Mr. President, as members of the National Assembly, working for the good of this country, we have no choice but to support Mr. President. And I believe, Mr. President, in supporting Mr. President, we're equally supporting ourselves and helping the average Nigerians. We are also very conscious, Mr. President, of the fact that based on the President's speech, there is a global downturn in the global economy. While in Africa's economy is growing. I am sure the growth of African economy can be attributed to the loans that African countries are getting from China to grow the economy. And of course, there is a greater exposure to China by developing nations. So we have to be very cautious with the President. Even looking at the parameters based on the achievement of the 2019 budget, despite the fact that it's a budget for just 6 months, 6 months to about 8-9 months. Mr. President, the figures are not quite encouraging. It is the responsibility of this National Assembly to ensure that
we bring down what needs to be brought down in the course of this budget defense. Because even looking at the projections for 2020, Mr. President, I'm only worried about the level of deficit financing, which is 2.8 trillion. We also have, if we take that issue with other revenue sources, I just hope that we are not planning to sell our stake in the joint venture. Because we cannot afford to mortgage the future of our children, to ensure that we meet the needs of the present times. Instead, Mr. President, what should be encouraging government as the National Assembly is to ensure that we go into another bid round. Because since the last time we did this was in 2007. And I know that as a country, we can generate a lot of resources towards ensuring this. And also shoring up our revenue, Mr. President. I'm also very happy that you are pursuing the issue of the amendment of the Deep Offshore Inland Basin Act with all vigor. Because through this, as the President has stated in his budget speech, we can bring an additional revenue of over $400 million for this year, then $1 billion for next year. So I think it's a matter of national significance. And I want to assure Mr. President that on Monday we'll be holding the stakeholders engagement on this all-important bill between my committee, upstream, my brother, finance, and the gas committee. Mr. President, I believe that as the National Assembly, I must also commend Mr. President for insisting that there is no new project that will be brought into the 2020 budget. Let us focus our energy and deploy resources to complete ongoing projects. And I think that's quietly a good strategy of Mr. President in ensuring that there is no new project that will be brought in. Let efforts be made towards the completion of all ongoing projects. Mr. President, if you look at the issues the worries that have been raised by our colleagues, I think the concerns are quite fundamental. So I believe that the Committee on Appropriation and the Committee on Finance, headed by my two brothers, has a Herculean task to balance the submissions of the President. But we must ensure that whatsoever we do as a National Assembly must reflect content, equitable distribution of available resources to the good of all Nigerians, no matter where they reside. I think on this note, Mr. President, I'm very confident that there is hope for this country. I'm very confident that there is hope for Nigeria and there is hope for all of us. So we should not make any mistakes to exercise any worries at all. We should rise up to the challenge and conquer these fears and these worries for our people.
Because the budget is titled Budget of Sustaining Growth and Job Creation. Therefore, my focus shall be on a few critical areas that can stimulate growth and provoke job creation to our teeming unemployed youth. Because I want to speak on behalf of the Opoloi, the poor. There are so many poor people in Nigeria. And this is occasioned because of the bad or the poor leadership that we have been having over the years. But I thank God that at least we now starting to have direction. I know that budget is a mere estimate, but then the budget could be made to work. For the experience that most of us have gathered over the years in public service, we know that budget could work. In Nigeria, since the advent of independence, before we took over from our founding fathers, we have roads from the north to the south. I thought that would ease transportation of goods and services from the north that is much endowed with agricultural produce to the south that we have much of the Atlantic Ocean and the hydrocarbon that they could be conveyed not necessarily by road, but it could be conveyed by rail. I have heard distinguished senators just talking about China. Mr. President of the Senate and distinguished colleagues, when shall we look like China? In 1993, China was not what it is today. But between a span of time, China has developed. They could have a rail line taking them from Shanghai to Beijing in couples of hours.
Why is it that we make our budget without considering this serious infrastructural deficit? Why is it that it is only in Nigeria that the rail line that is costing, even in Rwanda, that is costing in Uganda $5 million to produce a 1 kilometer of rail line? Nigeria will cost $56 million. Why don't we question ourselves? It leads us to ineptness, it leads us to incompetence, to greed, that we are not sincere. So what this budget calls for, that has been so presented by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, is that it calls for commitment. If we commit ourselves, if we are resolute to change the circumstances of people, then whatever is available will be made, will be utilized properly. When we are spending a lot of money in exporting papers that could be utilized in taking care of the other services, social services, providing education, providing healthcare services to the people, much as we are debating the basic principles, the philosophy underlying this budget that has been presented by Mr. President, sir, by the time we get into the nitty-gritty of fine-tuning the budget and putting it at the doorstep of the executive for implementation, we should consider the revival of most of these industries that are moribund.
I want to highlight three major areas. The first and the most important has to do with the education sector. Nigeria has myriad of problems and challenges, such as the high level of illiteracy, poverty, insecurity, and others. All this, Mr. President, has to do with the concern that we give to the education sector. Any country that wants to grow and develop should invest in education and manpower. Our budgetary estimates for education generally in the 2020 budget, I want to say, is inadequate. Our educational problems need a revolution or declaration of state of emergency to take care of this. And as such, the 1.5% which has been allocated in the 2020 budget is grossly inadequate. If we look at UNESCO's recommendation advising developing countries to allocate between 15 to 20% of the budget, of the country's budget to education, Nigeria is far below the standard, this recommendation. And so something should be done about this. Education is the fundamental foundation upon which developed societies are built, and Nigeria should get into this. Mr. President, I want to also add a voice to the issue of VAT increase in the 2020 budget to 7.5%. I would rather want to advise that the federal government should look at a way of increasing revenue by putting up measures to ensure that the VAT that is to be collected is collected and put into.
Mr. President, let me look at the increase in the GDP growth. I believe we can look inwards and assist the local producers in various sectors of the economy. The economic transformation will be incomplete without turning the development bank. Of course, these development banks like Agriculture Bank, Nexim Bank, the Development Industries Bank. So all these banks are there at least to assist the growth of the GDP. But it's unfortunate, Mr. President, these banks are not performing at least as expected. So definitely we have to look at what is the why, what happened that these development banks are not performing, so that at least it will assist in the GDP increase and the GDP growth. And also, when we look at the proposed increase in the VAT, definitely, Mr. President, this will have an effect, because a large effect on the price of goods and services not included in the VAT exception list will, which of course the common man will suffer. So definitely, if we have to look at this VAT increase, because at least for me, the 5% is okay. Once you increase the VAT, definitely the prices will go up.
It is one thing to have the budget. Mr. President, is yet another to have the budget properly implemented, especially in terms of funds releases, to identify with the priorities identified in the budget. In paragraph 23 of Mr. President's speech, he identified the budget priorities for 2020 as human development and job creation. Mr. President, these are certainly the topmost priorities for any nation that would like to grow. When you talk of human development, it is about the most important agent of growth and development. Job creation certainly is another aspect that will address the persistent problem of unemployment in our nation. And I want to emphasize, Mr. President, and draw the attention of my colleagues on our oversight assignment to ensure that funds released to government agencies and departments are certainly applied in line with the priorities identified by Mr. President and identified in the budget. My second intervention, Mr. President, is on the issue of the increase in the VAT from 5% to 7.5%. Initially, when I heard of the increase by the Federal Executive Council, I was certainly very worried. But my worries were greatly relieved, Mr. President, after listening to Mr. President's presentation and speech on the day he laid the budget on the floor of the chambers, by emphasizing that the VAT will be exempting some identified items, and most of the 10 to 15 items identified by Mr. President are really items that have direct impact on the lives of our citizens, food items in particular. My worries were relieved, Mr. President, that in the end, the VAT would not be severely hitting the basic needs of our citizens. And finally, Mr. President, I'm impressed by the President's intention to improve the welfare of our police and the armed forces. This is a very welcome development. There is no way we'll expect the armed forces and the police to put their lives on the line with hunger and misery. They deserve every attention to really encourage them to put in their best in the service of our nation.
Mr. President, my interest in this budget speech is in 5 key areas. 1, the 2019 budget performance. The President did say that the revenue performance is at a meager 58%. And as a former teacher, 58% is just a credit. And for us to move Nigeria to the next level, we need to start having distinctions. So, Mr. President, 2020 budget has to move to over 70%. And to do that, we need to ensure that we diversify our economy. We need to ensure that the leakages the President spoke of in item number 14, for example, the higher expenditure on pipeline security and maintenance and frontier exploration has to be taken care of going forward. Mr. President, the good news for me in 2020 budget is what the President spoke of in paragraph 23, where he did say that the 2020 budget is designed to be a budget of fiscal consolidation, investment in critical infrastructure, human capital development, job creation, and so on, incentivizing private sector investment, and enhancing our social investment programs. Mr. President, this framework of this budget as designed is the key to our movement to the next level. As beautiful as it is implementation that is the key, and that in itself lies under our purview as the representatives of the people. We need to ensure our oversight functions so that this is implemented as designed.
Mr. President, my very dear colleagues, of sustainable growth and job creation is very apt at this point in time in the history of our national development, because when fully implemented, it will go a long way to removing our youth from our streets. Secondly, Mr. President, the road infrastructural tax credit scheme is commendable. However, Mr. President, the amount of 205 billion as provided in the 2020 budget is grossly inadequate. Because I believe that the infrastructural development of this country needed to be handled holistically with timelines. But this is the only way to be able to attract investors in this country. I want to also commend Mr. President for providing 296 billion seeking fund for payment of local contractors. This is also very, very commendable. I just hope, Mr. President, that the petty contractors that are being owed 500,000, 1 million, 5 million, 10 million for an upward of 4 years should be adequately taken into consideration, in this regard. Mr. President, let me talk about the current conditions of our the manufacturing sector. You agree with me that this sector is supposed to be one of the major sectors that is supposed to contribute to our GDP. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Presently, the manufacturing sector, and in fact the private sector, only contributes about 9% to our GDP. This is not good, and it's not good to help create the right environment that will create jobs for our young school leavers and all those that are unemployed.
It is not only about sending the estimate to the National Assembly, Mr. President. We must avoid the pitfalls of the past. We know that once these estimates come, it is time to invite the MDAs to defend their budget. And we must make sure that these chief executives do not frustrate our efforts. Mr. President, I will expect you to use your position and the relationship between the legislature and the executive, which you have fostered, to ensure that the MDAs are alive to their responsibilities by coming on time to defend their budget. And after looking at the defense of the budget, Mr. President, we have another major assignment to ensure releases to the different ministries, the different MDAs. In the past, when you go for oversight, you find out that for the funds appropriated, you find out maybe only 10% was released. Nothing reasonable can be done with that. So those are the issues we must also look at. And we must also strengthen our oversight responsibilities to make sure that these funds are properly applied. Mr. President, I would like to look at the highlights of the budget. It is heartwarming to see the excess of 620 billion naira in the recurrent for 2020. This is aimed at tackling the labor issue at a time labor is threatening to close down and shut the economy. It is heartwarming that Mr. President has intervened. And also this money in the recurrent is supposed to also take care of our police and the armed forces. And this will go a long way in motivating the police and the armed forces, especially at this time when they really need to be motivated to fight criminality and brigandage and militancy in Nigeria. So that is a good one.
I'd like to refer us to page 3, section 14 of the President's speech, where the President said the revenue performance of the 2019 budget was only 58%, and that the budget target was underperformed because both the oil and non-oil revenues, specifically oil revenues, were below target of 49% as of June 2019. He also said that this reflects the lower than budgeted oil production, deduction of under recovery. So the low performance of the oil sector budget was due to under recovery. What is under recovery? Under recovery is fuel subsidy. Mr. President, my honorable colleagues, it is no longer history to know that before 2017, the fuel subsidy budget used to be in the national budget, debated in the House, and the National Assembly has the opportunity to monitor that cost. But from 2017, NNPC decided to absorb the fuel subsidy as a balance sheet item in their books and called it under recovery. So NNPC is now importing fuel, paying themselves under recovery. What happened to Petroleum Product Regulatory Agency? That is the agency that is supposed to regulate petroleum pricing and determine the supply and distribution of petroleum products in Nigeria. NNPC has usurped the powers of that agency as well as the powers of the National Assembly by making fuel subsidy a balance sheet item in their books. Between April 2018 and 2019, NNPC paid as high as 650 billion as cost for under recovery, higher than we have ever paid as a nation. And the question I ask myself is, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to reduce this? Because this is the easiest way we can raise funds to fund our budget. If our capital budget as of 2019 has been funded by only about 200 billion, and NNPC is spending 650 billion, then it means that we really need to do something about this petroleum subsidy issue.
What is of concern to me is that I can only see 30 billion naira slated for SIP program in this year's budget. Now, whether that's a typo, looking at the historical budget provision, or whether maybe in the details of the budget there will be another provision, possibly under the new ministry, is something I'm yet to see. But if it is only 30 billion, then Mr. President, it's a cause for concern, because the SIP program, even though it's in its infancy, has been a program that has attracted a lot of commendation from international observers. It's being supported by the World Bank. And for some states that have a large rural population and where poverty bites hardest, these SIP programs are the only direct link that the common man has with the national government. I'll give you an example, Mr. President. In my state, we have over 100,000 cash transfer beneficiaries in only 1/3 of our local government. And we're supposed to be rolling out this program in the other 18 local government. And my concern is that this 30 billion that I'm seeing in the budget, if that is really what has been set aside for SIP, is not even enough to support the school feeding program, which is currently feeding about 9.5 million children, and is supposed to move to about 12 million sometime next year. So, Mr. President, that's my concern, really. The SIP program was a wonderful program, very transparent program, and really something that attracted the attention of a lot of developmental partners who have lent their support. If we are now saying that in 2020 we have reduced the budget by over 90%, then I think, Mr. President, is going to be an issue that really will have a ripple effect, especially for frontline states like mine, and especially my constituency.
The 2020 budget estimates, focus on fiscal consolidation, investing in critical infrastructure, human capital development, and enabling institutions in key job creation. This is the thrust for 2020. But is it achievable? If it is achievable, we have to take cognizance of the few other issues. One of the issues is the unstable global economy. There's nothing we can do about that. It's beyond us. The other one is reliance on one product, that is oil. Security situation in Niger Delta, slow process of diversification, gradual import substitution drive, and inordinate taste for foreign goods. These are issues that will impinge strongly on the achievement of whether we will have fiscal consolidation, whether we will have good investment in critical infrastructure. Having said so, sir, the critical budget assumptions are just figures that we are playing with. But really, the exchange rate of 305 official and 357 commercial, we need to do a lot in order to bridge the gap, because the government is doing its own business at 305, other sectors of the economy is doing at 357, and the rest is not going to give us a good performance budget. To me, we must find how to bridge this gap. And how do we bridge that gap? We must supervise CBN and Ministry of Finance properly, so that we can close all the loopholes in generating foreign exchange, because that is where it pays us most. Today in this country, sir, even hotels are dealers in foreign exchange. It's terrible. We all travel outside this country, go to China. With dollars, no hotel calling your dollars. You go to a bank and change. But here, go to a hotel, pay dollar and do. Dollar has become even a major currency of Nigeria instead of Naira. And it's terrible, sir. These are the things that will impinge negatively on our budget until we sit down very well and close all the loopholes. What are the loopholes? We must create liquidity in foreign exchange earnings. OICs are not repatriating export proceeds. The purpose for repatriating is to make sure that liquidity is created in foreign exchange, and that will increase the value of the Naira. And once the value of the Naira is increased, all other subsidies are well taken care of. AMCON is carrying about 5 trillion Naira in debts. They cannot recover this money, sir. Let us not think that they will recover anything. They will not recover that money. So, and it is a sovereign guarantee because it is in contingent liability. Contingent liability. What do? We say I'm going to recover. Banks loan out this money. They were private loans, and they have now become public loans. So for me, I think we must review the status of AMCON, because 5 trillion is not a small amount of money we are going to joke with. Also, sir, we must reform, our civil service. We are talking about 2.something trillion in contracts, sir. And there's a lot of insider trading in these things. We have civil servants and public servants who are contractors themselves. Take the 2.something trillion. 10 to 12% of it is going to tax. 15% of it, 20-25% of it will go to profit to the contractors. Then the administrators probably will take 15%. Do you think that this 1-something trillion, if you remove about 40% of that going to these services, you have money to do the capital budgeting? No. So, sir, for me, it is not just putting numbers, this one goes to this one goes to that, this one goes to that. The fundamental issue is how do we control these issues? Finally, sir, I will talk about Mambila Hydro. I have listened to Mr. President very, very well. I've read the speech. I have not seen the issue of Mambila Hydro. I don't know whether it's hidden somewhere, but I know it is a fundamental and a critical infrastructure for the survival of this country. So where, I don't know, I have not looked at it, because power is just 127 billion. If we are talking about Mambila, we will not talk about 127 billion. Maybe it's hidden somewhere, sir. Maybe we'll come to look at it. Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. President, I want to go to very basic things about our budget, or what the budget is supposed to be for any society, for any country. Number one, budget estimate is an intention. Of course, it's composed of two components, the recurrent and the capital. The recurrent, as you know, even though it attracts even our budget over 70% this year, less than 17% will be made available for capital for MPAs in this year's budget. Then in which case, the greater majority of our people are going to get development in the area of provision of infrastructure, education, health facilities, and other social amenities for people with less than 20% of our annual budget. But of course, we expect that with time, this one should be reversed so that the greater majority of our people can benefit from our common patrimony. Mr. President, permit me to quickly go to some of the issues as raised by the leader in the lead debate. Number one, the areas that are very clear is very low revenue to GDP ratio. This one, again, has been our bane. And I thank God that the standing committees that we have in the Senate are going to live up to this responsibility, because to bring this estimate, which of course is an intention, to reality, we must put our mouth where our money is. In which case, if we are not able to raise our revenue, all these discussions that we are having will amount to nullity, and God forbid, all the revenue-bearing agencies must be geared up. We must stand up and live up to our responsibility in terms of oversight to ensure that revenue is taken up. Number two, Mr. President, the issue that we have seen over the years is that our capital expenditure, it has become a ritual. You can imagine that this year, for 2019, we have not been able to achieve anything in this regard. Mr. President just said before December, he expects that the 294 billion that has been released, we're going to have an additional 600 billion. As we speak, all the intentions, even our zonal intervention projects that will benefit the people in the hamlets in our different constituencies, that we have not been executed. So I expect that capital expenditure we really need, to be operated this in the 2020 budget, so that our people can get the benefit of it. Then again, even when all these things are possible, Mr. President, that we have revenue coming in, we have capital expenditure, of course, being executed the way it is. The provision in our act must strictly be adhered to, which is the budgetary execution, and then, of course, the meeting of targets. That provision, if we go through it, that Section 30 of Fiscal Responsibility Act, it is the responsibility of the Finance Minister to meet with the Fiscal Responsibility Commission and in the Joint Committee of Finance of the Senate and the House of Reps, so that there is quarterly briefing on releases and distribution of funds, because this one has been lacking.
We have avenues where revenue of the government can even be tripled. But the question is that it appears those agencies where major revenue are to accrue to government have become so powerful
that they are untouchable. And I want to advise that the next assembly should make a big difference. Now, Mr. President, if you look at leakages of revenue from NNPC alone, if well accounted for, we even pay off all our deficit budgets of 1.7 trillion. How much is it? This is what, if leakages in crude oil lifting in NNPC is blocked. 2, immigration. The internal revenue generation of immigration are not well accounted for. They are subcontracted to contractors who made away with federal government money with impunity of highest order. Mr. President, the relevant committees of the Senate should look at these areas and ensure that revenue accrued to government are well accounted for. What about stamp duty, Mr. President? Stamp duty revenue were never even accounted for up to 2019. In 2020 budget, the CBN governor just gave them, okay, go and put 200 billion there, where we believe that we can even raise not less than 3.5 to 4 trillion annually. Today, that revenue again is not accounted for. Nobody's talking about it. Number 4, the FRS. When you talk about increase in VAT, would there be any need? If there is effective collection of VAT, many state governments don't remit their VAT and withholding tax. Withholding tax is advance payment of income tax. And government is the large spender. It's the largest spender. They have many contractors that they are worth billions of contracts. Withholding tax element is never remitted to federal revenue. I will urge the federal revenue to double their effort to do state government withholding that and VAT audit. Audit 7 states of federation. Within the first quarter of next year, Mr. President, we will realize to pay off our budget, the deficit budget, to finance infrastructure decay in this country. Mr. President, again, that is the revenue aspect of the budget. We need to double effort. And all agencies of government that is charged with responsibility to generate revenue, they are quarterly reviewed, quarterly monitored, so that we have enough money to finance our budget. Mr. President, the expenditure aspect, 10.3 trillion. Well, budgets have been, sectorial allocation has been made, and if fairly disputed, there are certain critical infrastructure as affect each of the expenditure, and therefore, if it is well allocated by the executive, and then the appropriation committee also do justice in ensuring that revenue available are well allocated to various sectors of the economy. We believe that, Mr. President, many decayed infrastructure, like for instance, in my state, for instance, the federal road linking Akure to Ikere-Ekiti, that should normally take only 15 minutes drive. We normally take about 2 or 3 hours now. That is what promotes a lot of armed robbery attack on the road. Mr. President, again, we have the FUTA, School of Medical Sciences, that in 2014, 2.5 billion was released to that school. And later, because of certain things, the problems they faced, because of grant of CFO by the Delta government, the money was reported. When we do a budget on 305 naira to $1, and in actual fact, when we are talking about implementation, Nigerian importers who import raw material will be importing at the rate of 357. There's a 52% gap, and this has created a lot of infrastructural decay in the country, because at the rate of which they get foreign exchange is different from the rate we use to compute our budget. Mr. President, on that note, I want to advise that concerted efforts are made to double the revenue of the federal government. Thank you, Mr. President.
They also observed that the 100 billion naira allocation to defense and 48 billion for education needs to be improved upon, as they commended the 127 billion naira allocation to power and recommended that tax exemption be extended to pharmaceuticals. Senators spoke on other variables of the budget and also called for the rejuvenation of development banks across the country so as to enable them assist in the level of GDP growth. Well, this is what we'll call it a day on this edition of the program from the National Assembly. I'm Ignatius Nkwo. Enjoy the rest of our programs.
"24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can watch NTA International live on your TV